The cybersecurity drill began at 9 in the morning, but by 8:30, everyone in the command room had already decided what kind of day it was going to be. A controlled day, a prepared day, a day full of dashboards and status checks, confident executives, and one simulated attack that would be contained neatly enough to become a slide in the annual risk report. The command room at Meridian Health Systems had been built after the last ransomware scare, when 3 hospitals in another state lost access to scheduling, pharmacy records, and imaging systems for nearly 48 hours. Meridian's board responded by funding a new cyber operations center with glass walls, tiered workstations, threat intelligence screens, incident response playbooks, and a wall-sized digital map of the network that glowed in greens and blues when everything looked safe. It looked safe that morning. That was what worried Dr. Naomi Pierce. Naomi was 37, black, and Meridian's senior incident response specialist. She had spent 12 years in cybersecurity, first in federal threat analysis, then in hospital network defense, where she learned that healthcare systems were not hacked only through dramatic code and shadowy foreign actors. They were hacked through forgotten vendors, outdated imaging machines, help desk fatigue, shared credentials, unpatched lab systems, and the dangerous optimism of executives who believe segmentation diagrams behaved like actual segmentation. She stood near the back of the room with a laptop open, watching the drill environment initialize. The scenario was supposed to simulate a phishing compromise leading to credential theft and attempted lateral movement into billing systems. The internal red team would trigger fake malicious traffic, the security operations team would detect it, and leadership would practice containment decisions. It was useful but narrow. Too narrow. Naomi had reviewed the scenario packet 3 days earlier and sent a warning. The drill assumed the attacker entered through email. Her concern was the vendor tunnel. Meridian had a remote access connection with a third-party radiology support provider. Officially, the connection was restricted, monitored, and isolated. In practice, Naomi had found inconsistencies. One legacy authentication rule still allowed vendor-side session persistence longer than policy permitted. A diagnostic server in the imaging network was communicating across a segment boundary it should not have crossed. The firewall rules looked correct at the summary level, but raw logs showed periodic access attempts that did not match the approved workflow. Not an active breach, not proof of compromise, but enough to test. She had asked to include the vendor tunnel in the drill. The CTO ignored the request. His name was Richard Vale. He was white, 51, tall, polished, and deeply fluent in boardroom cybersecurity language. He had joined Meridian 18 months earlier from a financial technology company and loved phrases like zero trust maturity, risk-based prioritization, and defense in depth. He spoke confidently about resilience, budget alignment, and executive visibility. He looked excellent in crisis briefings. Naomi had learned that he liked cybersecurity best when it stayed architectural. The people who worked closest to the logs saw a different version of him. Richard did not like messy findings. He disliked being surprised by infrastructure he had already described to the board as hardened. He especially disliked when Naomi brought him evidence that complicated his story. At 8:45, he stood at the front of the command room, sleeves rolled to the forearm, coffee in hand, smiling toward the hospital executives and compliance observers seated along the side table. Today's exercise will test detection, escalation, and containment across our enterprise response protocol, he said. The goal is not theater. The goal is operational readiness. Naomi glanced at the wall map, still green. Beside her, Marcus Lee, a security analyst, whispered. He said no theater while standing under 4 screens. Naomi did not smile, though she wanted to. Richard continued, we will begin with simulated credential compromise, then observe the security team's response to lateral movement indicators. This is controlled, safe, and contained within the exercise environment. Naomi raised her hand. Richard saw it and almost managed not to sigh. Yes, Dr. Pierce. I want to restate my concern that the scenario excludes the vendor remote access pathway. If the purpose is lateral movement readiness, we should include that route. Richard smiled in the way executives smiled when they wanted witnesses to see them being patient. We reviewed that. No, Naomi said. We deferred it. A few people looked up from their tablets. Richard's smile tightened. We scoped the drill based on current risk priority. The vendor tunnel is a current risk priority. It is a monitored connection. It is a connection with session persistence outside policy and unexpected traffic from the imaging diagnostic server. The hospital's COO, a white woman named Patricia Sloan, leaned forward. "Is that true?" Richard answered before Naomi could. "It is under review. There is no confirmed compromise and the connection is segmented." Naomi looked at him. "The segmentation is what I'm questioning." Richard set his coffee down slowly. "Naomi, we cannot turn every drill into a full enterprise panic because a specialist finds an irregular log pattern." There it was, a specialist. When he needed her in an incident, she was Meridian's most experienced responder. When she challenged his assumptions, she became a specialist with a narrow view. Naomi kept her voice calm. "This is not an irregular log pattern. It is a plausible attack path. It is hypothetical. So is the phishing scenario. That scenario reflects common attack behavior. So does vendor compromise." Richard's jaw tightened. The compliance officer looked uncomfortable. The security analysts at the workstation stayed very still, eyes on screens, but ears clearly open. Richard stepped away from the front display. "The vendor pathway is not in scope today. We are testing the approved response process." Naomi said, "A process that cannot follow an unapproved path is not response. It is rehearsal." A silence followed. Marcus stared at his keyboard. Patricia Sloan's expression sharpened. Richard gave a short laugh. "That sounds dramatic." Naomi looked at him. "It sounds accurate." His voice lowered. "Dr. Pierce, you are very good at incident response. But leadership has to manage risk across the whole organization. If we chase every edge case, we dilute focus." Edge case. Naomi had heard that phrase too many times. A vendor tunnel was an edge case until ransomware entered through it. A medical device subnet was an edge case until it became a pivot point. A legacy credential was an edge case until it opened the billing database. In cybersecurity, edge case often meant the place nobody powerful wants to budget for. She said, "The edge is where attackers enter when the center is hardened." Richard looked irritated now. "Thank you. Noted." Noted. The corporate form of being dismissed. The drill began at 9 o'clock. At first, everything happened exactly as planned. The simulated phishing credential triggered a login anomaly. The security operations team identified suspicious access. Marcus escalated according to protocol. Containment playbooks opened. Richard narrated calmly for the executives. "Notice the detection timeline," he said, gesturing toward the main screen. "This is why our investment in behavioral analytics matters." The first red marker appeared in the billing environment, exactly where the scenario packet said it would. The team responded. Accounts disabled. Traffic isolated. Mock attacker contained. Everyone nodded. Naomi watched the vendor access logs on her own screen. Not part of the official drill. Not on the wall map. Still moving. She leaned closer. A vendor session had opened from the radiology support provider's address range. That alone was normal, but the timing was odd. It aligned with the drill start, though the vendor was not participating. She opened the session metadata. Long-lived token, legacy authentication path, diagnostic server access. Her pulse changed. "Marcus," she said quietly. He rolled his chair over. "What are you seeing?" "Vendor tunnel activity." "In the drill environment?" "No." "Production mirror logs." His face changed. "That's not part of today." "I know." She stood. "Richard." He was speaking to the COO. "1 second." "No," Naomi said. "Now." The room turned. Richard's expression hardened. "What is it?" "We have live vendor tunnel activity matching the path I flagged." He paused. "Live as in actual?" "Yes." "Could be routine support." "It is accessing the imaging diagnostic server outside scheduled maintenance." Richard walked toward her workstation. "Show me." Naomi brought up the logs. For a moment he studied the screen. Then he said, "This may be noise from the drill telemetry." "The vendor tunnel was excluded from the drill." He frowned. "There may still be overlap in logging." "No, this is production mirror. Different source." Marcus added, "She's right." Richard shot him a look. Marcus did not back down. Naomi continued, "The session is enumerating internal hosts." Richard's face tightened. "Enumeration or normal discovery?" "Enumeration." He looked toward the main wall. The official drill map still showed the simulated billing incident contained. Green indicators glowed across the rest of the network. That was the problem. The wall did not know what was happening yet. Richard lowered his voice. Do not escalate live breach language in front of observers until we verify. Naomi stared at him. We are verifying. I said do not escalate. An unplanned vendor session is crossing into imaging. It could be benign. And if it isn't, we lose minutes calling it benign. Patricia Sloan stood. Richard, should we pause the drill? He turned toward her. Not yet. We have not confirmed anything. Naomi said, pause the drill and isolate the vendor tunnel. Richard snapped, no. The room froze. He seemed to realize how sharp he sounded and adjusted his tone. No, we do not shut down a clinical support tunnel during business hours based on an unconfirmed pattern. It is not clinical care traffic. It supports clinical systems. It is querying systems it should not reach. Richard looked at her with the strained patience of a man who thought he was protecting leadership from panic. Naomi, you have been focused on this vendor path for days. I need you to consider confirmation bias. The words landed harder than they should have. Confirmation bias. When she found evidence after warning him, he turned the evidence into proof of obsession. Naomi felt the old cold settle through her chest. She had worked too long in rooms where black expertise was treated as intensity until someone else's dashboard validated it. When white men saw patterns, they were strategic. When she saw patterns, she was overfocused. When executives delayed action, it was prudence. When she insisted on action, it was bias. She said quietly, the logs do not have confirmation bias. Richard's face reddened. Before he could answer, the wall map changed. One green node in the imaging network turned yellow, then another, then three more. The breach map lit up, not from the scripted phishing scenario, from the vendor tunnel. A red line appeared from the third-party access gateway into the imaging diagnostic server. Then another line moved toward the file exchange server. A warning panel flashed on the main screen. Unscheduled lateral movement detected. The room went silent. Then the alerts multiplied. Imaging subnet, file exchange, credential probe, unusual SMB traffic, privileged account query. The red spread across the map like a stain. Marcus whispered, oh, hell. Naomi was already moving. Isolate the vendor tunnel, she said. Richard did not speak. She turned to the network engineer. Block remote access from that provider range now. Preserve traffic logs. Marcus, pull endpoint telemetry from the diagnostic server. Priya, check whether file exchange saw write activity. Elena, notify radiology IT that support access is suspended pending security review. Everyone looked at Richard. For one dangerous second, authority hung in the room. Then Patricia Sloan said, do what Dr. Pierce says. The team moved. Keyboards snapped alive. Phones came up. The official drill was forgotten instantly. The fake incident in billing remained frozen on the side screen while the real threat burned red across the wall. Naomi stepped to the central console. Containment status? Network engineer. Vendor tunnel blocked. Marcus. Diagnostic server shows suspicious process execution. Pulling hash. Priya. File exchange had access attempt but no confirmed write. Checking logs. Elena. Radiology IT notified. They're asking if systems need shutdown. Naomi said, not yet. Segment imaging from enterprise file services. Keep clinical viewing available if clean paths remain. No one reconnects vendor access without security clearance. Richard finally spoke. We need executive incident declaration. Naomi looked at him. His face was pale now. She said, yes, we needed it 3 minutes ago. He flinched. Patricia heard it. Good. The next hour was no longer a drill. It became the thing drills were supposed to prepare people for, though rarely so conveniently and humiliatingly in front of the executives who had doubted the one person warning them. The attacker had entered through compromised credentials at the radiology vendor. The legacy session rule allowed extended access. The diagnostic server had a misconfigured management agent. The attacker attempted lateral movement toward file exchange, likely to locate patient data or deploy staging tools. Because Naomi caught the behavior early and forced containment once the map confirmed it, the incident was stopped before exfiltration or ransomware deployment. Barely. That word appeared in the preliminary report. Barely. By noon, the breach map had stopped spreading. The infected diagnostic server was isolated. The vendor connection remained blocked. Legal and compliance had been notified. Forensics began imaging affected systems. Clinical operations continued under restricted access. The board received an emergency briefing at 1:30. Richard gave the opening summary. At first, his voice returned to its polished register. This morning, during a scheduled cybersecurity drill, Meridian detected anomalous activity through a third-party vendor tunnel. The incident was contained. Patricia interrupted him. Richard, before we continue, I want Dr. Pierce to walk us through the timeline. The board members turned toward Naomi. Richard stepped aside, not willingly, but he did. Naomi stood at the front of the conference room, the breach map behind her now frozen in red and orange lines. The incident did not begin with the drill scenario, she said. It used the vendor pathway I recommended, including in the exercise. Prior review showed session persistence outside policy and unexpected diagnostic server communication across segment boundaries. During the drill, live activity appeared on that path. Initial containment was delayed because the activity was not accepted as confirmed. The breach map later validated lateral movement. Once the tunnel was blocked, spread stopped. A board member asked, "How long between your first warning today and containment?" Naomi answered, "Approximately 8 minutes." Another asked, "How long between the map alert and containment?" "Approximately 2 minutes." The board understood. 6 minutes lost, not to technology, to disbelief. Richard looked down. Naomi continued, "Our technical failure was a legacy vendor access rule and insufficient segmentation validation. Our organizational failure was excluding a plausible attack path from the drill because it complicated the approved scenario." No one spoke. Patricia asked, "Recommendations?" Naomi clicked to the next slide. Immediate vendor access audit. Eliminate legacy session persistence. Require just-in-time access for third-party support. Validate segmentation with live testing, not diagrams. Add vendor compromise to incident drills. Give incident responders authority to trigger temporary containment on high-risk pathways when evidence meets defined thresholds. She paused. And no concern should be dismissed as bias, overfocus, or edge case thinking without naming the specific evidence that makes it invalid. The room stayed silent. Richard looked up. That line was for him. Everyone knew it. Good. After the board briefing, he found her outside the operations center. "Naomi," she turned. "Richard." He looked exhausted. The clean executive confidence had been replaced by something less attractive, but more useful. "I owe you an apology." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I ignored your recommendation." "Yes." "I minimized the vendor path because it complicated the drill." "Yes." "And when you showed live activity, I suggested confirmation bias instead of acting on the evidence." "Yes." The repetition did not make it easier for him. It was not supposed to. He looked through the glass wall at the analyst is still working. "That was wrong," he said. "It was dangerous." "Yes." Naomi waited. He swallowed. "I also treated your insistence differently because it came from you." She held his gaze. "Say that more clearly." His face flushed. "Because you are a black woman challenging my risk narrative in front of leadership." For the first time all day, Naomi felt something in her shoulders loosen. Not forgiveness, recognition. "That is the part that almost cost us," she said. "I know." "No," she replied. "You are beginning to know." He accepted that. "What do I do now?" he asked. "Change the process. Give responders containment authority. Put vendor access into the next drill. Stop selling architecture as security until logs prove it. And when someone brings you an ugly finding, do not ask whether it fits the story you told the board. Ask whether it fits the attacker's path." He nodded. "I will. Support it when it makes your dashboard look worse." That was the real test, not apology, governance. He took a breath. "I will." The incident became Meridian's most important near miss. Officially, it was categorized as a contained third-party intrusion with no confirmed data exfiltration and no clinical disruption. Internally, it became a case study in the danger of polished cyber maturity claims. The vendor contract was rewritten. Remote access moved to just-in-time approval. Legacy authentication exceptions were eliminated. Segmentation was tested by red teams every quarter. Incident drills became uglier, broader, and more useful. Naomi was asked to lead the new response authority framework. She accepted only after requiring that it include written escalation thresholds and protection for analysts who triggered containment in good faith. Richard supported it. Publicly, that mattered. 3 months later, Meridian ran another cybersecurity drill. This time, the scenario began with a vendor compromise. The breach map was intentionally allowed to show early uncertainty. Analysts were expected to act before every light turned red. When a junior analyst hesitated over whether to escalate a suspicious remote session, Naomi asked, "What does the attacker gain if we wait?" The analyst answered, "Time." "Then don't give it away." The containment decision was made in 90 seconds. Afterward, Marcus leaned over to Naomi and whispered, "Look at that. A drill that hurts feelings before patience." Naomi almost smiled. Progress. A year later, Naomi spoke at a healthcare cybersecurity conference about third-party access risk. She did not name Meridian directly, but everyone familiar with the incident understood. Behind her, a sanitized breach map glowed on the screen. Vendor gateway, imaging network, file exchange, blocked movement. The most dangerous breach path is often the one your leadership presentation says is already controlled, she told the room. Attackers do not care what your architecture diagram promises. They care what your logs allow. People wrote that down, she continued. The breach map lighting up did not make the vendor path real. It was real when the logs first showed drift. It was real when the specialist flagged it. It was real when leadership decided the approved drill was more important than the inconvenient pathway. The map simply made disbelief expensive. After the talk, a young black security analyst approached her. "Dr. Pierce," she said, "how do you keep pushing when they call everything an edge case?" Naomi looked at her for a moment. "You document," she said. "You test. You tie the concern to a failure path. You ask which assumption they dispute. And you find allies before the lights turn red." The analyst nodded. Naomi added, "But remember this. You should not have to wait for the breach map to validate your expertise. Build systems where evidence can be heard before the room is embarrassed." Years passed, and the Meridian incident became a training example in vendor risk management. Richard eventually left for another company, but before he did, he added a line to the Executive Cyber Readiness Handbook. A clean dashboard is not proof of safety. It may be proof of insufficient visibility. Naomi saw it in draft and wrote one comment. "Keep this." He did. Late one evening, long after the command room had emptied, Naomi stood before the wall map alone. It glowed green again, the same calm colors as the morning of the drill. But now to her, green meant only one thing. Nothing visible yet, not nothing wrong. She thought of Richard's dismissal, the word edge case, the suggestion of confirmation bias, the red lines spreading across the screen, and the silence that followed when everyone realized the real attack had entered through the door she had pointed to first. The map had lit up. The room had believed. But the truth had been in the logs all along.